Welcome everyone to BIPOC Futures. This is a fireside chat with Noni Session and Corrina Gould. My name is Carrie Malsby-Lute. For those people that are just joining us, I'm the director of the Center for Transformative Action here at Mills College and a guest of unceded Ohlone territory. I'm honored to be in conversation with these visionary leaders. I would like to introduce you to our closing speakers. Corrina Gould is the tribal spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of Lisjan, Ohlone, born and raised in her ancestral homeland, the Ohlone territory of Huchian. She is the mother of 3 and grandmother of 4. Corrina has worked on preserving and protecting the ancient burial sites of her ancestors throughout the Bay Area for decades. She's a co-founder, co-director of the Sogorea Land Trust. Noni Session is a cultural anthropologist and the executive director of the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. This cooperative supports BIPOC and allied communities to finance, purchase, occupy, and steward collectively owned land and housing. As an Oakland native, Noni's diverse formative academic and professional background contributes to her unique approach to economic development. Raised by teachers and small business owners, Noni cuts her academic teeth on the challenges of equitable economic development. As a Fulbright Hays Fellow, she studied international humanitarian strategies for developing communities globally. Upon completing her doctoral work, she helped found several small-scale collective civic action networks. After a run for city council, where she garnered more than 43% of the District 3 vote, Noni saw a clear path to ameliorating resource disparities in her West Oakland community, building more cooperative networks and galvanizing opportunities for collective economic action. I want to welcome Noni and Corrina to the stage. Hello.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi.
It's an honor to share space with you.
Nice to see you. It's been an amazing. Yes.
Oh, thank you. I saw you in there yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, I was getting kind of fired up.
I know there was one you said yes, and I was just about to say yes. So I was like, okay, I'll change it to preach.
I was like, oh my God, say it again.
Yeah. So I'm so happy. Yeah, it's been great to see you in sessions. And again, Corrina, honor to have you. So we are still here. We all stand at the intersections, right? As women, BIPOC leaders, carving out spaces to survive and thrive against all of the odds. And so both of you come to the table with different perspectives a bit, very similar as well, overlapping on how we can create liberated people in place. And so for this conversation, I was just going to start kind of broad and then hope to get into your work. And Corrina, I know that you have beautiful slides on the history of the Ohlone people that I've seen you share at different presentations. Is that something that you would be able to share with us today and kind of talking about the history of Ohlone people and how it connects to your work at the Sogorea Land Trust?
Oh, thank you so much. It's really a blessing to be here. And I just want to say, this is the first talk that I've done in the last few weeks because I'm going through mourning process right now. And I lost my brother recently. And actually, I thought that we would just do a chat today and not do slides so much, if that's okay with you. I'd love to talk about my land, the land that we're on. And I don't know, but I think that there's probably people here from all over the country, all over the world. And I always like to have people acknowledge where they're at and to find out whose land that they're on and what language is there and what is the name of the people that are still there. Or and so, for me, it's a beauty. And, I know that we were probably, this is coming from Mills College. And, I was saddened to hear that Mills College was thinking about closing down. And I think we should just say thinking about that, because I think that it's an important institution. And I also want to acknowledge that it's in our territory, the territory of Huchian, the territory that has sustained our families for thousands of years. And if you know about the East Bay, my ancestors, this is only one territory. This territory encompasses Oakland, Alameda, Berkeley, Emeryville, Albany, and Piedmont. So one of the many territories in the Bay Area. My ancestors, the Lisjan people, are actually it's a gathering of tribal people that were enslaved at Mission San Jose and Mission Dolores in San Francisco. So our tribe is encompassed of Ohlone, Bay Miwok, Plains Miwok, Yokut, and Napian people. So we are inclusive of the 5 tribes that were enslaved at the mission. And so that's 5 counties, actually. So, our territory is huge. And my ancestors have been here for thousands of years. Our mountain is Tuyshtak, and for those from the Bay Area, know it as Mount Diablo. Our waterway is Lisjan, who we are named after, and it was renamed the San Lorenzo Creek. Our bay was covered in our villages. So we were populated all around the Bay Area, and many of our villages were right along the waterways, where fresh water met salt water, and there was marsh area. We lived in a way that was what we talk about today as human beings is going back to being, leaving a smaller footprint on the earth, right? And so our ancestors, and many of our ancestors all over the world, lived that way. We lived in a way that our houses were biodegradable. The things that we left behind were very few. And so the things that our ancestors left here were our shell mounts. And the work that we talk about when Carrie introduced me was that that I've been doing work for decades to save and preserve the burial sites of my ancestors, which you can't see. I think that if people realize that in California, this is a very young state, that it is new, that in less than 250 years, that everything you see was built upon it, that this is not something that has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, but very new. If you think about the Bay Area, just in Oakland, there were over 50 creeks that ran through here, freshwater creeks that you can drink out of 150 years ago, that you can imagine that those places existed, and that almost none of them exist above ground anymore. And if you can imagine a place that was abundant, that there was food here for everyone, and that there was no concept of hunger or homelessness 200 years ago in the Bay Area. When we think about society today, when people don't have access to fresh water or housing or food, how far have we come as a society? My ancestors had these ways, and I always remember this story that my nephew told me a couple of years ago. We were coming back from doing an opening in Santa Cruz, and we're coming back to Oakland to do a talk, and we were, as we were driving, he says, Auntie, I know songs from all over the country, all these Native songs, and in the middle of the country, the songs from the Native people, they sing, and the songs are about ancestors, creator, have pity on me. I need your help. We need food and warmth. And because in the middle of the country, there's snow and harsh times, right? And there's this difficulty that happens. But in the Bay Area, this was a place of an abundance. And so our songs are different here. Our songs are thank you so much for all of the blessings. Thank you so much for the food that's here. Thank you so much for all of the things that we have in order to survive. And in a very short amount of time, Ohlone people had that whole idea changed drastically with the ideas of Western colonization. We were colonized by Spaniards first, with the mission churches coming from San Diego up to a little bit farther than where we're at today in the Bay Area, up to Solano. And there was 21 of those missions. The first 9 was started by Junipero Serra. My ancestors were enslaved in 2 of those that he created, Mission San Jose and Mission Dolores. And slavery is never talked about in California as a native thing that happened. And once the missions closed, after this drastic change in the way that we had to learn a different religion, we had to speak a different language, we had to stop doing our ceremonial things, our connection to the land began to sever. because of this colonization. There was, if you can imagine, a violence that people could never fathom, rape and killing and beating of people that was never fathomed on this land before, happened in a very short amount of time. Diseases and hunger happened here, and that had never happened before. And so you can imagine we're sitting in a pandemic today. That this was a pandemic that happened for 100 years, I would say. That this change, this constant cruelty that happened here. And then those 99 years happened in Mexico, won its independence from Spain. And the army, the people in the army were given huge swaths of land. So where we sit today in the East Bay, those what we call Huichin, was given to the Peralta family. And we hear Peralta all over the Bay Area still today, Peralta colleges and all of these things that are Peralta House, Peralta hospitals. There's all things named after Peralta. But what happened to our people? Our people went from being slaves for the missions to being enslaved on these ranchos here in the Bay Area. And then there was the Mexican-American War, and so the land was stolen a third time. So nowhere along this line was there land that was given by the Ohlone people to any of these people that came onto our lands. And so the land was stolen a third time, this time by America through the winning of that war. And instead of creating treaties like America had with Native people across the country, it was about extermination laws in the state of California. And so what many people don't realize is that the state of California was built on killing Native people, and backed by federal dollars, 1.7 million, claiming $5 a head and 25 cents an ear for Native people. It was legal to hunt Native people. They created vagrancy laws where slavery was okay as long as it was a Native person, because a Native person could not speak against a white man in the court of law. And so this had been the history of our people that were taken off of the streets and in front of a justice and was given away to ranchers and to miners. As long as they could feed and clothe them, they could have them for free for 25 to 40 years. They would kill the adults in villages, so began the desecration and the separation of family and kinship by selling off little girls for $300 and little boys for $180. And so this is the history of California that people don't get in their history books and don't get taught in school. And still we survived. And, I like to think about that we are beginning to thrive, that the languages are coming back, and that the caretaking of the lands and standing in our rightful places in our own territories, and to begin to imagine what this world would look like if we went back just 80 years and how we could take back our lands in a way that would actually clean the airs and the waters, that we could actually have abundance in the Bay Area, where we could wipe away hunger and homelessness again as it had always been here.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that very expansive history. And we're sorry, about your morning as well. And I thank you for coming today to share with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carrie.
So, Noni, I know you also have a powerful history going back a few generations, which now, comparing it to people that have been here forever, it seems like a much shorter period of time. But for this modern time, this modern Black time, it's quite a bit. So I'd love for you to talk to us about your history as a third generation West Oaklander, and how it manifests in your work at the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative.
I want to start first by saying to Corrina and I think I may have told you this in passing once before, how much I appreciated a very early moment in the founding of the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, where I saw you guys' little hand card in a cafe that said, pay your land tax, which I thought in and of itself was radical to say, there's a cost to this, all of this, and help us recoup what we have lost due to your presence here, all of us. But inside the little hand cart was a sort of a graphic drawing. I don't know if it was a linoleum cut or something like that, but it had the like chevron stacks in the background with the toxic smoke flowing from them. In the foreground were the mounds and the traditional houses. And I was like, it was what I'm thanking you for is tapping into my deeper imagination, my sort of like reconstituted remembrance of where we are. And I had a friend at the time who lived in the Richmond Hills, and we were sitting on their back porch, and I was looking out at the bay, and I was like, that's the picture in the Sogorea card. And I said I was sitting there with my daughter, and I said, look at all those houses out there. Can you imagine that actually all was native land, and people were like living their lives and minding their business and catching fish and chilling and working and laughing and all the things humans do. We don't have to get graphic. And it really sort of solidified as a third generation West Oaklander and a little kid of the most underserved and underprivileged. My family had a certain amount of privilege, having been here. My grandmother, a nurse, and my grandfather working for the railroad, and my father, the kid that made it good. Like, you know, he went semi-pro, and then we had a grocery store, the only grocery store, a grocery store. And so I sort of got to skip around West Oakland as if it was my playground, while most of us were in deep struggle, at least from the 80s forward after the crack epidemic and the market crash. And we were on the tail end of all of the eminent domain and the displacement and the municipal neglect. We were like headed toward the peak. Then the Loma Prieta earthquake, where the Cypress Freeway fell, the double-decker, and then this racialized displacement took off, although it had been in works for quite some time with Jerry Brown's vision, which you can look back to a Wall Street Journal article, I think in 1989, where he really laid out a blueprint for rapid racialized displacement. But skipping around West Oakland as a little kid, like imagining that there are watersheds underneath the ground, and like, ooh, maybe one day I'll write a story about how somebody ripped up the ground and the watersheds brought all the birds back and all the animals back. And then somehow, as we were founding E.B. Crack and really trying to surface the narrative, is when I ran across that hand card. And it really, like, literally filtered through me, as watersheds do, and like sort of like birthed some gold in my imagination. And at our recent funders briefing, we began with Talib Kweli's Ballad of the Black Gold. And I was trying to figure out how to open this to sort of displace it from this corporate comfort that investing in our communities is doing us some sort of favor. And I started thinking about profits, I believe, of which Corrina could be firmly grounded in that tradition of speaking prophetic word, because prophetic word reignites a reimagination of something that already existed, right? And I duplicate that because, as you point out, this history of capitalism, of the American empire, is actually a eminently short history that appears as if it always was, because of the absence of the definition of imagination at each generation, because the stories, the language, the textures have been completely disappeared. And even this convention that I am so happy to see spreading this field, where we speak the names of the people who never ceded this territory. We remind folks that we are still at this moment on occupied land, because as an African descended person, not only raised by Pan-Africanists, but I was actually a Black Studies and Cultural Anthropology major at San Francisco State, taught in one of the first Black Studies departments in the nation that had to be taken by armed force, right? We had La Raza Studies and Black Studies that by gunpoint, we had to demand a space to politically and historically educate our youth so that folks like us could speak the narrative, speak the history, and reignite the imagination. So connecting all those things up at that moment where we were trying to figure out how to surface an authentic narrative in our funders briefing, and not a sort of a begging narrative. I realized that Talib Kweli's work falls in the category of Black prophets. And as I was trying to figure out how to open this up, I'm like, so whose imagination are we going to live in? That of the prophet or the profiteer, right? Because when we look at the way that our city has moved since the 1969 redevelopment plan, but really accelerated under Jerry Brown, it is the profiteers, the commercial developers who have been allowed to lead the directions, the futures of our city, right, of our region. Folks who have never walked out on the pavement and stepped over a rickety old Black man while headed toward their $50 brunch. How are those people writing our site-specific plan? So my history of, having kind of a crotchety dad who went around and pointed at all the new things and said, look at how crappy that is, look what they're doing over there. And a mother who was a small business owner dealing with licensing and pointing out to me on a regular basis how Black small business owners were closed out of opportunity in the very city which they had grounded themselves, arrived as labor population, and built this economy. And then at this point being sort of discarded as if we no longer have a use in terms of the demands of the transfer of economy from a heavy economy to a service economy, and now to a tech economy. So we're just sort of scooted over as a version of desperation. And one of your panels yesterday, Kat Taylor, said something very salient, that desperation is expensive for all of us, right? But it keeps those in power because then they become an object lesson to the rest of us, like stay in line, beg for these little peanuts around the edges, and you won't be like the old rickety old man on the sidewalk. Instead, if we ask ourselves, what new imagination can we demand for ourselves, right? Like June Grant pointed out that West Oakland is at a critical nexus for the whole region, right? The peninsula, the South Bay, hecking San Francisco. And while they've moved goods and services through our region for 30 years, and our children have experienced the highest levels of undereducation, underemployment, the highest levels of asthma and adverse reactions to us being treated as a space for production while not being treated as producers, people who own their means of labor and deserve the excess capital that comes from the means of labor. While all that's happened, our city leaders have moved on to a new body of prioritized people, none of whom live, work, or have a future here. So the connection I'm making between my childhood history of seeing this place as my home and my playground, and my formative education really informing me of the political flows of power and symbolism, and how that changes what people perceive as their life perception, and how that led into E.B. Pratt was this accidental political campaign that I ran. And when we approached the last sitting council person and many of the other leaders about why our cities look like this, what they often said to us is that they couldn't do anything about the market. They abdicate power to the market at every turn. But it is a fiction that the market is a moral device. It is run by people advancing their interests. So E.B. Pratt chose to contest not only the market, but to contest the conventions of the market and how we approach our demand for the ways that you come into our city, the way you invest in our city, and who must be the leaders of these acquisitions and these transformations we make. And again, I'll return to Corrina's work. One of the core innovations that led us was planting justice, turning land back over to the Ohlone. Like, this is not a favor. This is not charity, right? This is resistance to land theft through this fictitious, invisible hand of the market. You can always abdicate power and say, this is the way it is. We're all here. We must deal with it. Or you can choose to live inside of your own imagination that's been formed for ourselves and by ourselves and choose another pathway. The gentrification is not a foregone conclusion. It appears to be so when we attend to the dominant narrative. But how about we re-narrativize, as I'm so gratefully following the Ohlone in that effort to speak our names, to revive our truths and our imaginations and our stories.
Thank you, Noni. I love that connection. It's powerful. Corrina, I'm actually I love that you used the word thrive is something that, it's one of my favorite words, and actually my next question was, what does your vision for a thriving Indigenous future look like? And also you can expand on, what does that future also look like, incorporating guests like ourselves, after speaking more towards the future of your people and what that, can look like. And I know you are doing a lot of work to make that, to actualize that. So you could tap into that as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Thank you, Noni, for all of that. Really just kind of brought it back to, what are we looking at when we're just looking at Oakland, right? I always think of, what are we looking at when we're looking at Oakland? I got to participate in this conference, gathering together at Occidental. Oh gosh, I can't remember. It's up in Occidental, but there was a bunch of us from the East Bay that talked about what does it look like in 100 years in Oakland, right? What does it look like to be in Oakland in 100 years? And, so we all came up with all of these different ideas. We were broken up and so began to think about what does it look like in Oakland? We're still talking about land as a commodity right now. We're still talking about it as something that you can buy and sell. And as an Indigenous person, as an Indigenous woman who grew up, that is not our belief system. We've taken ourselves as human beings outside of that circle, right? We believe that we are more important than anything else that was created. We believe as Indigenous people that we were the last ones that were created in this whole circle, right? Everything was created before us. So we're the little brothers and sisters. And when we as the little brothers and sisters took ourselves outside of creation, that circle of creation, we all believed that we were better, and then we messed up everything else for everything else that was created here in a very short time. And I look at this time of pandemic when we've sat down as human beings, that first part of the pandemic when we were all on sit time, as I call it. And when we were on sit time, our Mother Earth began to heal herself in a very short time. The waters began to clear. The air became fresher. There were things that were happening in the earth that actually showed that she could help and heal herself without us bugging her. And so I began to look at those things and what does that look like in terms of our relationship to this earth and what we have done and how we're supposed to be on this earth, right? We can't continue to buy and sell and trade that has carried us since the beginning of time. That we have to begin to think about it in a different way. How do we come back into alignment with everything else? When I think about it, I was like when I first moved to deep East Oakland, right? I live in Sogorea. And when I moved here, there was no bees here at all. Mm-hmm. And so when I moved here, I was like, how do we bring these bees here? Because Without bees, this little tiny animal that most of us are afraid of, without them, we would cease to exist because we need them to pollinate our food and our medicines. And they're almost extinct. What are we as human beings doing to ensure that those relatives stay alive? And so I think it's really about how do we change our thought processes again. What is really important right now in order for us to survive? Is it buying and selling and trading land, or is it collectively trying to figure out how do we survive as a human species so that my grandchildren, your grandchildren, our great, 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 great grandchildren are here? I think that we have enough technology right now collectively in this world to figure out how to clean up our waterways and how to stop the things that we're doing. And I really love the way that Noni talked about this whole idea of market and how it's moving the entire world in this way, and how it is that human beings are not going to get back in alignment or stop this crisis that's happening unless we change our thought process. Mm-hmm. What does it look like? For me, it's in 100 years, this is my dream, because Oakland is a huge piece of land, right? As I look at the Bay Area, Alameda County. Alameda County has 427,000 acres of land. Ohlone people own less than an acre of that land together. That's my home, my auntie's home, and the land that we take care of, because Sogorea Land Trust actually doesn't own any land. Less than an acre of land is taken care of by Ohlone people, just in Alameda County. So displacement is real. We have been displaced since the beginning. What does it look like to come back and to thrive? Is that reconnection with the land and our waterways, a way for us to get back into taking care of the land in the way that it's supposed to be taken care of. You know, each piece of land has songs that go with it, that there are ceremonies that happen on this land, and that in order for us to bring balance back into this land, we have to be able to do those ceremonies and sing those songs. We have to be able to save those sacred places and share those places with other people on our lands. We have to get our ancestors out of the institutions and back into the land and give them dignity again. We have to be able to do that kind of work, and we cannot do that work without everybody that now lives on our land. And so when people say that they like, that thankful to be guests on my land, so what I look for as a guest on my land is that you need to come and work with us to make sure that these things are able to happen. Our language was taken away from us. We do not have a full speaker of language. And my daughter dreamed years ago of being a language speaker. When she was 14, she didn't want to learn Spanish or French. And I took her to UC Berkeley to speak to someone there to talk about bringing that language back, right? We were blessed to work with a linguist there for a short time. And then I was very naive at the time and introduced them to another tribal entity that's in the Bay Area, and they refused to allow my children to speak the language because they were enrolled in their father's tribe. And so we took back our power, and my daughter is the language carrier for our tribe and is teaching my grandchildren that language, and teaching through the beauty of Zoom and other kinds of platforms. We're able to do this language for people all over the country that are tribal members. And so thriving means being able to use the technology today to do the work of our ancestors and for the future. It means being able to have land where we can bring our medicines back, and remembering what it means to tend to that land, to look at the cycles of when we're supposed to gather and what do those medicines look like, and to bring people along with us, because there's no way that we could do this work without everybody. When that land was given back to us on 105th Avenue, what we call Lisjan, because the crazy thing about that piece of land is that it's a half-mile walk from my house. And I didn't even know about PJ before when I lived here. PJ got a hold of us because they learned something at Standing Rock. And Standing Rock was this huge place where people came from all over the world, from all walks of life, to stand for the water. And they did that together. And what a beautiful movement that was. And at the same time that that was happening, I had this own struggle at home about standing for the West Berkeley Shell Mound. It coincided together, these sacred places that needed to be taken care of. But Gavin and Ohlone invited us. We didn't know them. And to the back of this land, and said that they had learned that they were supposed to work with the First Nation peoples on whose land they were on. And they offered us this quarter acre of land. This quarter acre of land, no land had ever been given back to Ohlone people. A half-mile walk from my house, along the Lisjan Creek, which we're named after. A place where it probably was a village site, because where the 880 freeway is actually is where the bay used to come to. And so that was probably one of our village sites. So my ancestors work in these crazy miracle ways. We've been able to put up a arbor in that land. We haven't had one in 250 years here. A place where we have ceremony. A place where we're able to have a fire without asking permission from anyone else. A place where we're able to mourn our dead, to bring our relatives from places all over the world. A place where we're able to marry our children in. A place where it's a beautiful place. But that place was created by people from all walks of life. People from all different backgrounds. People came and worked that land with us. It wasn't done in a silo. And so when we look at what does it look like to thrive, it looks like to be on our land in relationship with all people that live here, in a place that we're living in equity, and equity in a real way. Thrivance doesn't mean just for us. In order for us to thrive, everyone that lives in our territory has to be able to have everything they need taken care of. A good host ensures that. When you have guests at your house, you feed them the best food, you give them the best gifts, you sing, you tell stories, you laugh. And that's what it means to be a good host. And so we need good guests, because if good guests don't come and do that work with us, then we can't do it alone, and we can't thrive. And I'm probably taking up too much time.
That's perfect. I would love to sit here and just chat all evening. This is beautiful. This idea of all of us thriving reminds me of Heather McGee's opening talk about solidarity dividends, as she calls them. This idea that we all thrive more when we're together. So thank you so much for that. That was beautiful. And Noni, I would love for you to also, really speak to that. What does this thriving world look like for Black folks, centering Black folks and BIPOC, really all of it, but in particular? What is this future creative exercise 100 years from now?
Well, I guess from my take, there are some pieces that need to be in place to get us there, right? I think of my purpose on this planet, and my so blessed role to have at EBPREC is to be an enabler, to set these structures in place, to model them, to spread them, to galvanize people around them, and to just articulate them and fertilize folks around their possibility. So forgive me for being a little bit more formal, but I would want to represent the future I see based in the 3 mission pillars that drive what we do in EBPREC. And I'll just talk about them. People can reach out to me at noni@ebprec.org for more information, but I'll just use my words right now. So we have 3 mission pillars. represented by hashtags, because we're living in a world where to spread information, you tag it so folks can find it. And the first is Land Without Landlords. The second is Restorative Economics. And the third is Heal People Power. And I'll discuss those each very briefly. So Land Without Landlords really refers to where Corrina's work grounds, where it is so critical that we decommodify land. You don't know how to behave appropriately toward what land does for community, for our futures, for healing, for daily economic production. And I mean social economics, not just capitalist production. If you only can understand the land as a static object with absolute boundaries that is a zero-sum game for a limited amount of people. Mm-hmm. You have to understand it as a key member of the human relationship, and you have to treat it like you would treat someone with whom you value that relationship. And one of the things it gives back when it's permanent, when it's co-stewarded, is that it gives stability, so then that communities have time and space to build out their futures together. It becomes the well that you can go back to generation after generation to dip into for culture. If every month, week, or year, as landless peoples have had to do in empire for so long, you have to pick up your bags and move, you don't have time to think about your stories or your language or your history or your identity or your gender. You're just on straight survival. It's a critical part. Restorative Economics, really inspired and generated and fertilized by Nwaka Agbo, who was one of your speakers, but also to me, I again position her in the range of prophetic speech that really began to clarify my imagination around what it is, the task that is in front of us as communities, rebuilding ourselves from this disassembly brought on by capitalist production and the conventions of the so-called financial market, right? And so restorative economics recognizes that we've been dispossessed of more than things like a hard asset, the land, the housing. We've been dispossessed of all of the sort of intangible criticals around which culture moves, identity moves, relationships, a voice in the conversation, civic and social empowerment, right? Like there are all these things we need to do to effectively govern ourselves, to heal historically, to gather people in a place for a conversation, to make a collective decision, which are things that really affect the durability of community-led endeavors, of community in general. One of the reasons our organizations spring up with so much hope and vision and future, then fall apart so quickly, are because of these other assets, if you will, that are also stolen from us when we're underserved and undereducated and isolated and repeatedly wounded through capitalistic violence, through social violence, through linguistic violence, all of those things, right? I mean, weakens and we're risk averse because of that. So and that for us, that grounds in this concept of Heal People Power, because this whole nonprofit industrial complex, all of these CDFIs, mission line and lenders, banks, anyone you talk to will certainly be able to deliver an impactful mission statement built on the backs of serving the most underserved. But when you step inside of their organization, when you look at how they use capital violently, June Grant also landed on this when she was discussing the way that people use greening language to talk about ADUs, but really it's actually very coercive the way they cause the capital to be used in these so-called regenerative projects, where that Heal People Power fully acknowledges that to move through this thing that some call just transition, that we have to reorient our collective lens on how we share power, how we deploy power. When we create new organizations, are we passing on the same learned hierarchical command style Western power practices as set us up in this position in the first place. These new regenerative leaders we elect, what kind of power sharing are they doing? What kind of information sharing? To heal our social and racial wounds among one another, we have to not be essentially white people writ small. We have to be who we were. We have to be something completely new and something completely old at the same time. And it takes radical experimentation, and it takes time and self-forgiveness and other forgiveness. And so Heal People Power is really taking into account that this is going to be very messy for us. This is not going to be some neat structural adjustment where some expert comes in and tells you to monocrop and then puts you in debt for the next 100 years. This is something completely new. And this is an experiment in our future.
I love that. It actually also brought to mind, and I love that you're quoting from people that have spoken earlier today and yesterday and connecting those dots as well. But Carolyn Johnson from Black Cultural Zone, and her conversation said that she doesn't want to recreate Black billionaires and Black multimillionaires. Like, that's not about equity, right? We need a system that's different than that. So very much so. So we only have, let's see here, a little over 5 minutes, and I have time for one more question. So, one of the interesting things is Heather McGhee talks about, looking at data and linking public government divestment, right? When people started not trusting the government, they stopped taking, they stopped funding public institutions, right? And public benefit items, that it was a move towards privatization that she was linking with racism. And so I'm wondering if at all, like, what role you feel government plays in the work that you do. And I know it's probably even more nuanced for you, Corrina, being that, government stole your land, but I'm just wondering if at all, what role government plays within what you're trying to do. Is kind of like looking at government as also a collective of people, right? And some people might say that we should demand more for our government so it funds these public institutions and these aren't privatized. So I'm just kind of, again, wondering if that comes up in your work, either of yours.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it needs to fall, and we need to start all over again. And I'll just say that. I mean, the United States government was, started on, killing us off and enslaving other people, and, white supremacy and heteropatriarchy and Christianity. And it's all got us to this place where I don't think it fits anymore. I think that capitalism needs to die, and that there needs to be something rebirthed. And if we want to rebirth this earth in a way that's going to heal, like Noni was talking about, that it's going to be messy, and we're going to have to figure out together collectively how we're going to survive and create some new form, if you want to use the word government, if you want to figure out a new way of being, in order for us to thrive. I think that we can't continuously look at a government structure that has been hell-bent on destroying people in the margins, and have looked away as people get gunned down and as people continuously are being pitted against each other, as a way of saving us. And I think that that's why E.B. Perk and Sogorea Land Trust exists, because it's outside of those norms that we're thinking about all the time for someone to save us. We have to take it in our own hands to save ourselves. And so that's going to look differently. Now, how does government work inside of us? The only way that we could do this is to use a mechanism in which they've created in order to get land returned back to a tribe that is non-existent according to them, that we are not federally recognized. I mean, people who have been here for thousands of years to not be recognized by the government is a violence every single day. When we talk about the history and the way it's taught, we talk about a genocide that is continuous It's a white paper genocide that talks about us in the past. And so I think that, we need to question all of those things. We need to change it. We need to have these conversations. We need to dream about a different way of being on this land together in order for us to thrive. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be asking this government to save us, or that we need to figure out ways to save ourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you. Noni, I don't know if you want to answer it, or we could also end. We have a few minutes, and so maybe if you all could just take, we want to give as many tangible tools and opportunities for people to support your work. So what do you need from the audience, from us? If there's like maybe a few things that you could speak to briefly about how we can support your work and your vision for this future. I'll write it down. I've been taking notes.
Noni, you should go next. Go ahead.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Step up, step back. Well, the thing is when people see E.B. Precht's work in motion, they imagine that it's some sort of like clean acquisition process. Like we bring in investment and then we buy a piece of property and there's your, fine bureaucratic expert process in the box. And all they need is the 1.5% investment in our acquisition projects, which we are currently in the middle of a capital raise for our next commercial acquisition, where we'll be bringing 3 commercial footprints to the market for Black arts at 50% of market rate, and 3 below market rate residential units to it for 7th Street. So we're trying to revitalize a corridor in historic West Oakland. So we are bringing in investment now. So if you have capital to buy $1,000 shares at 1.5% return, please invest. Please advise your funds. Please advise your relatives that we're reinvesting in our own community over and above what other people think we deserve. Also, though, to get our projects there's a whole front load of work that we do, organizing our community members around visioning a project to the point where we can take it into development, the development of the project, the shopping it around to larger pots of capital for the full acquisition, the organizing of foundations and philanthropic high net worth individuals to start to understand what it looks like to reinvest in our communities outside of this extractive nonprofit industrial complex. How do you build wealth without continuing to tie our arms behind our back for donor needs? So all of that works on a philanthropic budget. So if folks want to donate to the work we do to prepare our communities and prepare the organization to get to the acquisition, we also are a fiscally sponsored project, and you can donate through Sustainable Economies Law Center or directly on our website. Other than that, share the words, spread this vision to your neighbors. There are projects like ours popping up all over the nation. And the critical part is not one organization can be the bottleneck. We have to share this, and so that it can manifest in all of its versions, so we can all bring our communities back to a vision that serves us together.
All right, thank you so much. And how about for you, Corrina?
Yeah, thank you, Noni. Thank you for your good work. It's amazing. I think that on the same lines, we are doing this work because it's necessary, and and the work is not just for a small group of people. It's actually for everybody that lives here and works in our land now. And I think that Shi'umi is a great way of doing that. Shi'umi is a gift in our language. That's what it means in our language. Shi'umi, we called it a tax, and we hate that word, but everybody understands what tax means, and so we use that. But there are, because of that work that we've doing, the first work actually started up with the Wyandotte people. They got a piece of land and an island returned to them, and of course it was trashed, and they had no way of cleaning it up. So 7 Generation Fund actually started a tax up there for them, and we ask for permission to use it. Now there's Duwamish Real Rent in the Northwest, and Mattahatta Fund in New York, and the Tongva people in LA are thinking about doing something similar. And so that I think that it's a really good way of people engaging in the places where they work and play and live by working with the Indigenous people and supporting the work that's happening. That's a great way of doing it. And many of people may know about hashtag land back, and that's not something that's a joke. Give the land back. And so, you know, there are churches that have tons of land. There are organizations and institutions. If Mills College is going to go under, give the land back. It's one of our traditional village sites, you know, and so that's not something that's just like a fun thing to say. As Indigenous people all over the country, it's about giving the land back so that we can do the work that we need to do in order to heal from the historical traumas and actually build ourselves so that we can thrive and everyone around us can do the same thing. And so, you know, it's a beautiful idea. I'm working with all of these young people that are amazing artists and amazing workers of the land and are living in the Bay Area where it's the highest to live. And so our own staff people are having, you know, housing security issues, and we don't have any housing with Sogorea Land Trust. And so, you know, the land that we usually get asked to take care of is land that we can take care of and can't build on. And so land back is a real thing. We need some land to build villages for people to live in, for places that people can begin to dream so they can breathe again and not have this thing over their head. And so that's a dream as well. You know, show up at the West Berkeley Shell Mound when we put a call out, protect and preserve the sacred sites of our ancestors on this land, stand side by side with us and hold the lines when we need them. You know, and look at our website. We have amazing things, and it's actually a living website. People are on it every week, and they're changing it and moving it, and there are new pictures up. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and come to our event, Seeding Hope, and listen to those, and become partners with us, and come and work the land and plant some stuff and heal through digging your hands in the ground with us.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to visit you and meet you in person and come and work the land.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Noni and Corrina. You all are really inspiring everyone to think about how we could collectively build wealth. And for, you know, folks that want to give land back, I'm so happy that that's being done. And, you know, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, Corrina, with us and coming despite your mourning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.